where were we? I forget now.
Lee Miracle. You're going to put a suffix on it.
Yeah, so Lee Miracle Ba is her name. We put the B-A-A on the end because she has passed, and we want to honor her and honor the fact that she's no longer here. But I had the pleasure of taking a storytelling workshop with Lee. And Lee shared a story she was Stolo from the Stolo Nation in BC. And she shared a really important story that really speaks about that connection to the natural world and how we are connected to it, how our actions really influence what goes on there, and how their actions really influence what goes on in our world, and how the two of them really speak about healing. So Lee shared that one day she was sitting in her kitchen and the phone rang. And it was a friend. She was in Toronto and her friend was in the Stolo community out west. And she was very, very excited. She said, Lee, you're not going to believe it. The salmon are back. And Lee said, mm-hmm. And he said, no, not the salmon. The rivers are full of salmon. They haven't been like that for years. She goes, yes, I know. And what's happened in our community? And her friend said, what are you talking about? What do you mean what's happened in our community? Lee said, no, please calm down and just answer my questions. So what happened in our community about 40 years ago? And the friend said, well, we had a lot of abuse, physical, sexual abuse. There was a lot of abuse of drugs and alcohol, and no one was respecting anybody. And she said, what else weren't they respecting? She goes, well, I don't know. She said, well, they weren't respecting the salmon, were they? She goes, well, I guess not. And then what happened? Well, we began to go back to our traditional ceremonies and our ways of knowing and being, and men began to accept their roles and responsibilities. Women began to accept their roles and responsibilities, and we began to heal. And she said, yes, and that's why the salmon are back. And the woman said, I don't understand. And she said, well, what is your role as a Stolo woman? What is one of the things that's your role? And the woman thought about it for a while. She said, your role is to look after the salmon. In the spring, there's a ceremony that you do. You take some of the young men from the village and you go and you actually do a ceremony. And you let the salmon know how grateful they are that they're back. And when you as a woman were being abused and not respected, and all of the women in the community, when you weren't being respected, the salmon said, we will not come back. We will not be there because the people, our caretakers, are being abused. Our caretakers are being disrespected. Our caretakers who are part of this traditional way of being are not being allowed to do their traditional ways. They've forgotten their path because they are so encumbered with trauma and with abuse, so we won't come back. But when the women began to heal and they began to sing again and to dance and to do those traditional ceremonies and to be part of community, and when the community as a whole began to heal, the salmon went, now we will come back. Now we will swim up those rivers because now the women will be here and we can have that ceremony again. We can now be connected. And I think it's a beautiful story because it doesn't matter if you're Cree or if you're a Hopi, we have that connection with all those aspects of life, and those ceremonies are there to honor that connection that goes back tens of thousands of years. That importance that we understand that we are just one part of it, and that there is a plant world, and there's a world of coyotes, and the foxes have their nation, and the birds have their nation, and the fish have their nation, and they're all sentient beings, and the earth is a sentient being, and we need to listen to it. We need to listen and really just stop and sit and ground ourselves and really try to just listen to what is going on. There are lots and lots of companies now that talk about forest bathing. Come out to the forest and bathe. It's a great idea. I think anyone that can get out of the city and go and bathe in the forest. But we have ravines here. You don't have to go and give somebody $200. Just go and hang out in a ravine. Go to Value Village and pick up a nice thick blanket for $10 and go take that off down to the woods and put that on the ground and lie down there for a whole day and just let everything that's around just speak to you. And it'll eventually speak to you if you listen. It's about a relationship. Really, really important. When was the last time when we sat down and had a meal that we ever said, thank you, cow, for giving your life. I know you had probably a really traumatic journey, but you still kept your original responsibilities and you gave your life so that I have something to eat, and I want to thank you I want to honor you. Parsnip, thank you. You grew. You grew here so that now I have food to sustain me. And I want to let you know that I'm grateful that you gave your life so that I can eat. Yeah, these things sound really facile. They sound really basic. But they're also really important. If we don't take time to honor those things that have given their lives for us, it gives meaning to our life to do these things. It gives meaning to understand it. It gives meaning to sit down and to ask someone from another culture, please share the stories that you heard as a child. Please share the stories that are there, because I want to know more about you, because we're walking together on this path. We're walking together as human beings, so I want to hear what you have to say. It helps me grow as a person. It helps fill me up. And then I will share stories, and we will have a wonderful meal together, the two of us sharing these stories. And they help to fill up that spiritual need. They help fill up those emotional need. They help to fill up that physical need. They help to heal us. They are so important. In February, there's something in the Anishinaabe culture they call the sucker moon. And it's there at the time when the suckerfish, the male and female suckerfish, come out, and they're great numbers. But what they speak about beyond that, beyond them just providing food, is that the suckers travel to the other realm. And there they learn about healing, and there they learn about purification. And they bring this back for us in this realm so that we can then begin. Because spring is a time of healing and purification and beginning again. And they bring that spiritual knowledge. They bring those things with us. And it's important, even if we just think of that as a time in February, while the suckers come, it's a time when spring again, when the earth again is saying, yeah, I'm here, I will provide. But it provides far more than just the physical food. It's providing that spiritual food that we need. It's so important to be able to have those things. It really makes life beyond worth living. It adds that whole other dimension to living. When we think of stories that, there was a storyteller, a Mandan storyteller, whose name I don't remember, but if you're interested, he has a program on wisdom of the elders. If you check it out, I think he might have been in week 3 or something. But he shared a story about the Mandan people, and about a story called He Who Eats Grass and He Who Eats Anything. And the story, I will tell you what he said at the end of it, because it brought tears to my eyes, and it made the hair stand up on my head, because he was back, and it evoked my blood memory. It was so powerful. But he speaks of these two animals, one that was maybe a meter high, one slightly higher, maybe 1.5 meters. One called He Who Eats Anything, that literally ate everything. If you left your moccasins around, they'd chew them up, even the beads. If you had soup that had gone bad, he'd eat it up, or they would eat it up. Water that had bugs and flies in it, they didn't care, they'd eat it. And he who eats grass would just drink the cleanest water and eat the freshest grass. And they worked side by side with the Mandan people to move from place to place. There was no U-Haul. The Mandan hunters wouldn't call up and say, yeah, the buffalo are migrating, Tatanka's moving, and we need to get, Tatanka moving services here so that we can get all our goods and move over to hunt them. No, they had to gather everything up and put these poles on these two creatures' backs and have them carry their goods to where the buffalo were again, where they could hunt them. And so it came after a while that one beautiful creature, He Who Eats Grass, came and said to the person, the orator who was looking after the entire community, I have to tell you something, and I need you to gather everyone together. And He Who Eats Grass was very shy and dug at the ground with his hoof a little bit, and finally said, I have to tell you that I'm going. And the Mandan people threw up their hands and said, why are you going? Why? Have we beaten you? No, he said, you have not. Did we make you carry too much? No, you never did. He said, you never used bad words with me. You never beat me. You never mistreated me. You made sure I always had the freshest water, the sweetest grass. When those winter winds blew so cold across the plains, you brought me into the lodge to keep me warm. I'm not leaving because it's my choice, but I'm leaving because I have to. I must go. But if you remember me in prayer and in song and in ceremony and in story, I will come back to you. Not as you remember me now as He Who Eats Grass, but I will come back. So the storyteller went on to say many, many years later on, there were two Mandan hunters out on the plain, and they noticed in the distance a very, very tall four-legged. And every time they ran after it, it would run, and off its neck came a rainbow or a wave of hair, and off its tail, same thing. They had no idea what it was, and so they traveled to their village, and there they asked the older one there, they offered him some tobacco. Can you please tell us who that was? And the old one went and thought for a while and came out and said, no, I'm sorry, I don't know what that creature is. But travel a day or so farther on, there's another village, another storyteller, and perhaps they know that they're older than I. And so they traveled on, and indeed they approached the storyteller there, and they offered her tobacco. And she went into her lodge, and she thought about it and prayed on it and sang and put some tobacco in her pipe and smoked on it and came out and said, no, I don't know who that is. I'm really sorry. I have no idea. But please, don't be so downcast. Don't be so sad. There is one older than I, and they live 3 days journey on. You travel there, and I am sure they will be able to help you. And so the men were so anxious to find out what this very large creature was that they traveled on, because they knew that when they looked at it on its head, there were no antlers like a deer or an elk, and there were no horns like a tatonka, like a buffalo. And so when they got there, they shared that information and they asked, what is it? And so the elder there, she went into her lodge, and again she prayed and meditated and smoked on her pipe and sang a little bit. And after a time she came out and said, yes, I know who that is. That is he who eats grass. And they have come back to us as they say they would. And what you need to do is you need to take a gourd and fill it with water, and you need to take some dried meat, because you can drink and you can eat as you run, but this creature cannot. And chase it, and eventually it will tire. And when it finally tires, you need to put down some tobacco, and you need to say to it, thank you, he who eats grass, for coming back to us. So the Mandan people more than likely shared that story with Lewis and Clark, those characters that went out trying to find a passage to the west. And I'm sure Lewis and Clark said to the Mandan people, great storytellers, amazing imagination, but you and I both know there were no horses till the Europeans came. No horses here. And the Mandan people, I'm sure, politely looked at them and said, okay. But that story they'd carried for a long time. And I didn't realize how long they'd carried it until the Mandan storyteller shared with me on Wisdom of the Elders that Eohippus, the very first horse in North America, was found about 40,000 years ago, those bones. And so those Mandan storytellers and other indigenous peoples as well had shared stories with the Europeans. There were horses here before you came, and they said, no, there weren't. And indeed there were. Eohippus existed. And that story, I'm going to get goosebumps again, that story is at least 45,000 years old. And the Mandan people carried that story. And so I'm so grateful. It is a gift, and I'm so grateful that Mandan storyteller shared with me that I can carry that story, because it's so powerful. And it's not powerful because science proved that the Mandan people were right. It's powerful in that it shows the resilience. It shows the importance of stories and how they inform our lives, how they inform what we think, what we know, and how they expand it beyond what we even can possibly imagine. Because there's a far greater world out there than we even think about, and those stories help to enrich it and inform it and really help us to connect on every level with it.